Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining Shifting Consumer Behaviors and the Importance of Cross-Border E-Commerce with Tommy Kelly, CEO, eShopWorld. As a reminder, if you have any questions throughout the conversation, to please submit them using the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. Here's your host, Deborah Weinswig, CEO and founder of Coresight Research.
Thanks so much, Drew, and good morning, everyone. We're honored to have all of you here with us today. Today is very special for us at Coresight Research as we recently published an in-depth buyer's guide for cross-border e-commerce, and we now have the opportunity to talk with eShopWorld on this very topic. eShopWorld is one of the leading global e-commerce technology and service partners. For many retailers, this is a look to international expansion. Many of you may be on the phone with us today who are currently working with eShopWorld. We at Coresight, we're also publishing an 8-part series right now. It's on Retail Reimagined. And this idea of, kind of thinking about what we've learned around the world and how can we apply it today. Some of the topics are gamification, live streaming, group buying, and how to drive consumer engagement. We'll be highlighting more of these in the weeks to come, and we'll have an ebook out, let's say by the end of August. We continue to see this blending of digital and physical, and where one ends and one begins. We're going to talk about that with Tommy today. I think that with the challenges that so many retailers are facing, all of us working together and collaborating will truly be the answer in terms of stronger sales this year and a significant change in terms of how many of us do business next year. We're honored to have the opportunity to research and advise our clients on the intersection of retail, real estate, and technology. And this year, unlike any other, we at Coresight have been providing answers to questions that have never been asked before. We're able to do this as a result of your support, and we want to thank all of you for joining us today. We are very excited to have Tommy Kelly here with us today. He is the founder and CEO of eShopWorld. eShopWorld is an award-winning company employing more than 400 people, including teams of experts all over the globe, helping to engineer the customer journey across strategy, technology, marketing, payments, logistics, compliance, and much more. He and I have often had in-depth discussions about how supply chain relates to every aspect of the business, and I think you'll enjoy this conversation with us today. Tommy's background, he spent much of his career in supply chain and logistics. Prior to eShopWorld, he served as CEO Europe and North America at Aramex and was the group CEO and founder of Two-Way Forwarding and Logistics. He also serves as the chairman of the board of the World Freight Alliance, and Tommy is a serial entrepreneur and is very well respected by brands and retailers alike around the world. Tommy, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Deborah. Pleasure to be here.
So, in my opening remarks, we talked about this true blend of the digital and physical. How have you seen the consumer change their shopping patterns? And, what are your predictions for the rest of the year?
Look, I think the pandemic has accelerated a lot of the digital aspects of retail. Very quickly, we've seen a significant increase in shopper behavior towards digital, right? But I think we've seen also a much broader age demographic of shopper, right? And I think that brought its own trends as well. I think for the most part, we had seen, probably older demographic shopper coming in, spending a much higher basket value for sure, but I think also a repeat shopper. So I think the trend I think which is very helpful for retailers is that you've now a new cohort of shoppers that are very predictable in their behavior, right? And I think earlier people used to talk about the younger generation and the level, I won't say unreliability, but I don't think they're as sticky as the older generation of a shopper, right? So I think we've during and post-pandemic, we have seen anywhere from 100% to 400% increase for brands in shoppers. Now, I think we've also seen a massive demand in the cross-border space, right? And I think that's driven by a few things. There has always been a pent-up demand for large brands internationally, right? And I think that was, exacerbated by the fact that, some of the outlets that was available to these shoppers internationally closed down during COVID. So we've seen an exponential growth. I think if you look at it, domestic versus international, there's been a lot higher growth rate on the international opportunities during and post and during COVID.
And what is your expectations? You talk about the sticky nature of the kind of more seasoned customer who we're seeing shop more online, and once again this idea of true customer engagement. How are you seeing that older customer shop, and are they shopping more channels, or is it more retailers, or what are you seeing?
I think it goes across the board, right? But I do think as well, there has been a behavior change, right? I don't personally see that older demographic going back, because I think there's a number of concerns. I think there's a reluctance to rush back to stores, number one. I think, that demographic have now seen, the convenience, and maybe there was a reluctance previously to go online, or there was, again, I talk about human behavior. Once it changes, it doesn't pivot back quickly, right? So I think we're seeing that stabilize. So we had seen probably in March, there was generally a shock, I think, across the general shopper demographic, and there was a reduction. April, we've seen probably a 70 or 80% increase. May, we've seen again, probably the same proportion again, probably over 150%. And that has stabilized. So we're seeing year over year, we're probably seeing anywhere across retailers from 100 to 300% growth. And that's a constant now. So we expect that to run through for the end of the year. So we think the shift has been made and it will stay. And I think the brands that have actually focused on what the requirements of the shopper and really got very focused on not only the localization, but targeting the audience, in that country, they're the real winners. And I think it's again about solving, the requirements for the specific demographic or the type of product you're selling, and getting hyper focused on, that customer experience. That's where we've seen the real winners.
Tommy, can you elaborate a bit more around your comments on targeting? Is it this idea of personalization, or the shopping experience? What are you seeing that's kind of really been successful, and is that also by geography?
It is, for sure, and it's clearly for what we're seeing is, and I think the data is backing this up. It's ensuring that it's managing customer expectations by market, and that's really what. So I think the people that are focusing solely on the customer asks and customer expectations, that's what's winning. And it does change by country, by demographic. So like if you have sort of I just pick New York, like a city shopper will have a different requirement than an urban shopper versus a rural shopper. So the brands that have, we have seen that have managed that expectation, but it's about customer engagement. So I don't just think it's about experience by itself, and I think the experience has to be good, but it's where you start with the customer engagement journey, how you fulfill the requirement of and make sure that journey is super localized, and you need to take friction. And when we talk about, again, the older demographic or the younger demographic or any demographic, nobody wants friction in the engagement with the brand. So the more friction you remove, the better the engagement, the better the conversion rate. But also too, we have seen, a big repeat, a higher percentage of repeat shoppers during the pandemic. But again, I go to the brands that have that specific engagement model are again clearly a higher winner than the brands that are giving a very general and bland approach to their consumers.
Tommy, as we were preparing for this call, you brought up something that I thought was very interesting, and we all might know it. Thinking about how to do something about it is a completely different story, which is, for those retailers who are US based and still sell most of their goods in the US, right? With the US being, if not the most heaviest, discounted market in the world, certainly one of them. And so when they're not looking right outside the, kind of outside the country for growth, they're really leaving a lot of margin on the table. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, look, I think, when we talk about the US, it's probably today the most highly discounted market in the world for sure, right? And I think when brands realize when to go outside the US, there's a lot more margin opportunity, number one. But I think also, and a point that's not talked about often is you have all that seasonal opportunity. You can follow the seasons through the different regions. And I think, as brands engage more with an international audience, one, they have a much broader, I suppose, global, naturally they have a broader global audience, but we can see openly the price points outside the US are a lot more attractive than they are within the US. And sometimes people think international engagement is expensive. And in fact, the margin opportunity, I say, far outweighs, international far outweighs the domestic opportunity. And there's an awful lot more competition in these very, I suppose, now crowded markets where they're not in some of the more the bigger international markets.
Tommy, as companies are thinking about, the holiday season, which is not that far away, and if they only have a domestic presence right now, what's the timeline for them to think about a truly kind of global cross-border, kind of e-commerce opportunity for themselves, and what do they need to do to get started?
Look, I think there's a view where you need to know where you want to get started, and my recommendation is that you don't need to solve 200 countries. That's not the answer. The answer here is understanding what's the top 10, 20, 30 markets you need to go to. And when we look at international, really, it's about the top 30 markets. That's 90% of your addressable audience. And again, typically it takes us about anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks to properly, internationalize a brand. Like, the advantage we have today, like we have the people with the knowledge, we have the data, and we have the technology. And I think sometimes people get confused that it's only about technology. The technology is the tool that enables the digital solution, but for the most part, you need to know what you're solving, what the go-to solution in a country is, how you're going to apply, and how you want to represent your brand within. And brand equity is super important. I think what we're seeing internationally is there's a massive amount of appetite for some of the really, and one fantastic thing about the US, and it's probably for the most part a large percentage of the key sought after brands that are required internationally. So there is a demand for them, and it's how you release that demand. And I said, probably, and my recommendation is that you look at your top 30 countries, you look at how you want to approach them, and then it's a process of rolling out over a 12 to 20-week period, to capture your audience effectively.
One of the challenges we've always heard from retailers is around payments. How does eShopWorld solve that, and just how do you think about it?
Yeah, look, payments is one part of it. Yeah, and if you really want to solve the payments problem, you need to be, not only solving the local payment types, but you need to get into local acquiring. You need to have in-country entities, and again, you really need a global infrastructure of your own with those entities, with your relationship with your local banks, with the local acquiring system. So it is an ecosystem. When people talk about going international, it isn't about presenting only your product or opening a site. It's about creating the ecosystem within the country. And it goes from, I could talk about payments forever, but it's all about making sure that what that expectation or that consumer expects, the behavior they expect around a payment infrastructure in a country, you have to have that available for your mass audience effectively.
We at Coresight often help, enable global cross-border e-commerce, and oftentimes it's, kind of thinking about which countries and kind of personnel and marketing and merchandising. Tommy, when companies come to you to get started, right, I think it can be very overwhelming. Where do they start? And once again, if they wanted to focus on kind of holiday 20, what would be your advice? Because I mean, we see it and it can be incredibly overwhelming, and you're dealing with multiple countries.
Yeah, look, I think for the most part, brands, it isn't, I go back to it, it's about the people and the knowledge. So you need to have your people infrastructure, right? So I think eShop solves a lot of the key issues for brands. Is we today have a team of about probably over 100 people that are solely looking at what, in-country expectations are, how they prepare and strategize with a brand of how to go to market. So our policy is not just to launch and learn. It's about launch with a plan. And I think for the most part, where if a brand launches badly, from a brand equity perspective, it can be damaging. So I think if you're going to go to a country, you need, again, to come to a company like us. And we also say to brands, if you have a best-in-class solution, we don't need to replicate it. We'll tell you if it's good, and you stay with your own experience. So some brands have launched internationally and launched successfully. And when we come in with a lot of brands, we may not do all the countries. We may say, in certain geos, you're really good, we can add no value. But in these other geos where there's more complexity, maybe, we can add a lot of value, and then we engage with the brand. So our relationship is very much it's not a technology relationship, that's part of it. It's a trading relationship, it's a partnership. And what we work with brands very well is where, if we can't add value, we don't engage, right? And I think for us as well, it's a part of how do we collectively, as a partnership, grow brands internationally or in countries. And that has been a philosophy from day one. And we look at our brands today, a lot of our brands have grown from, $5 million to $200 million. And that's the type of partnership we want. We believe a lot of the large brands today have that sort of potential opportunity internationally. And that's where we work with brands, very collaborative. And it's across all the areas you said, Deborah, earlier about, from the strategy to the, customer acquisition, to understanding in-country requirements, launching, product selection, pricing, logistics, returns. So it's an ecosystem per country effectively.
How do retailers typically handle, customer service when they're in all these geos? And because, there are different expectations for customer service by country, how does that come into play?
Well, yeah, look, again, we provide customer services at country levels, and different brands have different requirements. And I go to expectation and the partnership. Some brands handle level 1, we handle level 2. Some countries handle all customer service aspects. So again, it's back to that requirement. And we are seeing clearly how, if you have a very good in-country consumer experience, the demand on your customer service is a lot less. So like we have seen cases where, brands that would say doing 10% international traffic, it was a 30% demand on their customer service tickets, right? Because they hadn't the right engagement with their consumer digitally, and they were driving traffic to their, customer service tickets to their central team. So for us, it's about getting the experience right, and again, we can provide the customer service, and that's part of the package. But I'll go back to the earlier point. I think it's having your ecosystem and having all of your online and offline sort of structured into sort of one ecosystem that's completely customer centric effectively.
I'm going to ask you one more question because we have a lot from the audience, and thank you very much. And if anyone would like to, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. But, I always like why now? I mean, is it, in terms of thinking about global cross-border e-commerce? Because we've had many conversations with retailers who thought about it over the past few years. They've kind of dipped their toe in the water, but why now?
I think why now I think it's a very good question. I think now is the shift has happened, and the shift, it continues to happen. So I think people that don't get a digital engagement with their client right now, there has been or will be, and it'll continue to happen, the transformation from physical to digital. It was ongoing. It is completely accelerated, and I think for the right or wrong reasons, the pandemic has pushed everybody into a new world order. So I think if people and the brands again, I think that are winning are getting that customer engagement. If you have the right customer engagement and you acquire customers are loyal for the most part. And when we spoke earlier, if you're solving a customer or a shopper, requirements, and you're doing it in a very collaborative and you have a good customer engagement model, I don't see people shifting quite quickly back if they're getting satisfied digitally. So you need to be part of that journey, and you need to own. And I think for the most part, most brands now with equity want to own their customer. And I think, the platforms and all the rest are fine for certain categories, but I think if you have, a business with a lot of brand equity, the last thing you want to be doing is trading on a platform. You want to own your customer and keep control on that customer engagement model.
All right, well, I'm gonna start with the most recent. So this question comes from Mark. If a brand or retailer is looking to expand across borders, what are some of the pros and cons of handling it in-house versus using a vendor?
Well, I think speed to market for sure, right? So companies like ourselves, we spoke earlier, can have you in country in sort of 6 to 12 weeks, right? And that's a very realistic time scale. I think in-house, you're missing, and I won't say exclusively, but as we spoke earlier, it's about the in-country knowledge. And maybe let me expand on that point. Like if you're going to 20 countries, you can't have a French expert, an Australian expert, so there's a lot of ingrained data, that you need to understand. And there's also actually in-country knowledge, right? So I think for companies to acquire that, typically when we talk to companies, they have a very strong, solid international team. But it's impossible to have an expectation that it can understand between Japan, Russia. And so I think the knowledge base, it just takes a long time to acquire. And if you grow consulting for that, so to be able to wrap it up in a solution like ours, I think it's a much faster route to market, and you launch in a very cohesive, structured fashion on an international basis.
Great, thank you. And then I want to know the answer to this too. Which significant market internationally is least understood and which is most complicated?
That's a good question. So I think which is the most least understood, I would say the challenging markets, clearly markets like Russia, some of the South American markets are quite challenging. I think also too, you have nuances in a lot of key markets. I think if you take, people talk about Europe as a market. Europe isn't a market. Europe is actually, multiple markets within a market, right? So when you think about Europe, you have UK, which again will go into a Brexit structure now quite soon, and that will be a standalone market. And French shoppers, completely diverse sort of expectations that are British versus a German versus Italian. So when you think of complexity of Europe, super complex when we look at it internationally, we tend to bucket it into one solution. I said Russia can be challenging. Places like Mexico, massive opportunity, huge amount of complexity in there as well. And I would probably say, so as I said, South America, like Brazil and some of the high tax markets are quite challenging as well.
This is a good one from James. Do you think there is room for smaller brands and companies to expand into international markets, or is this primarily the domain of larger brands?
Look, I think there's two answers to that question. One is the appetite for international growth. I think we see a lot of small to medium-sized brands that have the right strategy behind their brand, and going international is not about just, if you have a lot of brand equity, it's a lot easier because you have a pent-up demand, but you must follow your customer as well, and you have to drive traffic. And again, it's not dissimilar. There's certain things that go across domestic and international, and that's about understanding what customers you're targeting, how you target them, having a proper marketing strategy. So the answer is yes. If you have a small brand that has a unique quality and you're going to promote your brand internationally. It sure makes sense. Yeah.
So we have a great audience. This is a great question. Many brands use Amazon as part of their overall growth strategy, and in some cases, their international expansion. Can you expand on why this may or may not be the best solution?
Look, I'm probably somewhat biased, but my answer is that when you go on Amazon, you're not delivering your brand experience. You're delivering an Amazon experience, and really, you have no influence. Amazon is really a vending machine for for the most part,
right,
for markets, right? So, like if you want, and we spoke about pricing and brand equity and all that, that's all taken away from you, right? So, I'll go back to the dispensing model. Like that's not what you want to be. And we spoke earlier about margin enhancement. If you and as I said, for the most part, a lot of brands, clearly brands we represent, a lot of brand equity. One, you want to preserve the equity, but I think the key point is you want to own your customer. In Amazon, you do not own your customer. So, the cost of, people talk about the total cost of ownership. Getting a customer is very difficult. Keeping it is difficult. But in fact, never owning it and paying a commission for somebody to own it, I just think it's for me anyway, I don't see it, I see it, excuse me, suitable for some small brands that just don't have that brand equity. It might be suitable.
I guess actually, Tommy, it's a really interesting question. And, there are a lot of, smaller businesses, really interesting designers, artisans that, that are looking for other markets and probably have, not only does the CEO or the founder have, kind of a great personality that, would translate well internationally. How do these, but I think oftentimes when companies are small and we speak to many of these, there's a feeling, oh, how do I make a difference? How do consumers find me? How do you think, from your perspective, right, at eShopWorld, is there anything differently that you do depending on the size of the brand or the retailer?
No, for the most part, whether you're large or small, you want to provide a very good experience. But we've also seen, let's be honest, we've seen some very, very, brands that were unknown 2-3 years ago, that are pure play digitals that are massive, right? So different models. They use the influencer model. So again, be fairly familiar with Asia. Like, Asia is very dominated by influencers, right? So I think we're seeing that going across the general geos now. So again, I go back to the problem you're solving. If you know the market you want to solve in, you need to understand what to solve for that is, and then you need to understand how you're going to place your brand and position in that.
This is actually a great question from Jonathan, because we've had it asked in many ways. But delivery got slower during COVID. Is speed as important as it was? And what speed is important, and how should a brand or retailer think about speed of delivery and the level of importance to the consumer right now?
I think even pre-COVID, this was a big debate, right? So I think predictability is super important. So I put predictability ahead of speed, right? So yes, clearly the shopper, the consumer has got more tolerant during COVID, but pre-COVID, there's also a sustainability issue here, right? So, people are asking the question, if you order toothpaste and it comes in a box in 3 hours, like what's the cost to the environment of getting that there? So I think not only brands as well as consumers are started saying what's acceptable, and and I'm talking more so now in the sort of apparel, cosmetic spaces. I'm not talking in the food space. So I think there is certainly an acceptance that predictability is speed. Next day is not a requirement, and I think there was a bit of hype before everything had to be next day. We're not seeing any major concern with consumers with that 2 to 3 day experience.
Tommy, one thing that's interesting is, as we have a lot of brands and retailers on, somebody asked, and so maybe just so for a potential follow-up, that there's this opportunity, people want to see if there's an opportunity to connect with you, because this is really, once again, as we look at holiday, it gives everyone hope that there are other markets and there's other geos that are interested in product. And I actually think what's incredibly important is this idea of margin and demand. And, especially if you're in certain markets, there's probably a glut of product, and in others there's a dearth. So I just want to let you know there is a lot of interest in the Q&A, but let me close it out with a question from Jeff. You mentioned you don't take on brands you can't help. How do you make that determination? What metrics do you use prior to bringing a client to Brazil or China? Is it social media buzz, international traffic, .com, or other?
Honestly, it's a piece of everything, really. We have a very good, I suppose that's one of the key things. We have a very holistic engagement with a brand before we go live. And as not so much for our sake, but for the brand's sake. We want to ensure that if a brand is going to launch internationally, that they're going to do it successfully, right? So I suppose it's in both our interests to ensure. So it goes across, the brand equity, it goes across, the demand they're seeing out of the different geos, also their plan and their marketing spend within a country. So I wouldn't tie it down to one piece, but again, we're always really happy to talk to a brand and have an engagement of understanding how we can work together with them.
Well, Tommy, I can't believe our time is up. It feels like it was a blink of an eye. This is truly one of my favorite topics, and you are really one of the leading experts in the world. Thanks again for the discussion and for your time today. If anyone wants to follow up with eShopWorld or Tommy, we can help facilitate that. Please, everyone, join us for our next call next Wednesday on Open for Business, where we'll talk about all the opportunities that retailers are seeing. We'll have Glenn Allison, who leads IT for Tractor Supply. As a reminder, this and all previous webinars are listed at Coresight.com. Thanks for joining us. And Tommy, thank you for an amazing
Deborah, thank you very much. It was really a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.